What drives a person to abandon familiarity and comfort for the unknown? How does time change a man when he becomes a silent observer of his own world? And what shocking revelation awaits when the years of secrecy finally come to an end? Classic Storytime Hub presents Wakefield by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a reimagined English retelling. Step into the strange and haunting mind of Wakefield as Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic tale is brought to life in this reimagined version. I once stumbled upon an old story, tucked away in some forgotten newspaper or magazine, a tale told as fact about a man we'll call Wakefield. What he did might seem impossible, yet it happened, and it was as strange as anything the human mind could imagine. Wakefield was married, living an ordinary life in London. One day, without warning, he simply vanished. He didn't announce a trip, nor did he confide in anyone. He slipped away quietly, and for reasons no one could guess, not even his wife, he moved just a few streets away. There, unseen and unheard, he settled into a small, anonymous lodging, and for more than 20 years he lived like a ghost. Every day he watched his home. He saw his wife, Mrs. Wakefield, tending to her life, her routines, her quiet loneliness. And yet he remained invisible, a shadow just beyond the reach of her gaze. He witnessed the years pass, the seasons shift, and the world around him change, all while he kept his secret, his own existence folded into silence. Then, just when everyone believed he had vanished forever, his death assumed, his estate divided, his name fading from memory, he walked back through the door of his house, as if returning from a mere day's errand. Quietly, almost reverently, he resumed his place as husband, and from that day onward he was devoted and loving until the end of his life. It is a story that baffles the mind. How could a man live so long in self-imposed exile, so close yet so distant from all he knew and loved? And yet, it speaks to a strange truth about human curiosity, isolation, and the peculiar choices we sometimes make. Some may never understand Wakefield, and perhaps no one could ever repeat such an odd, audacious experiment, but it lingers in memory, haunting, enigmatic, and profoundly human. Whenever a story lodges itself deep in the mind, it demands our attention, and time spent pondering it is never wasted. You, the listener, may choose to reflect quietly on Wakefield's strange fate, or, if you prefer, wander with me through the 20-year enigma of his life. Perhaps a moral will emerge, or perhaps not, but either way, the tale carries a weight of thought, and every unusual act leaves a trace of meaning. So who was Wakefield? Imagine him as you will. He was in the prime of his life, calm, steady, a husband whose affection had never flared in passion, but had settled into a quiet, habitual devotion. In truth, he was the kind of man whose heart, by nature of its gentle inertia, might remain faithful simply because it moved so little. Intelligent yet lethargic in his thinking, Wakefield's mind drifted through long, lazy musings that often led nowhere. Words rarely caught his fleeting thoughts, and imagination, true imagination, was almost absent from his character. He was not feverish with ideas, nor did he burn with the need to create or surprise. His heart was cool, yet not cold, his mind orderly, yet unimaginative. And yet, against all expectations, this quiet, unremarkable man would commit an act so bold, so extraordinary, that it would etch his name into the annals of human oddities. Those who knew him best might have called him the last man in London likely to do anything memorable. Everyone, that is, except the one who knew him most intimately, his wife. She had never dissected his mind, yet she sensed certain peculiarities, subtle threads running through his quiet life, a soft selfishness buried deep in his idle routines, a peculiar vanity, restless and uneasy beneath his calm exterior, a hint of cunning, though it rarely achieved more than the harmless concealment of trivial secrets, and occasionally a touch of what she half-jokingly called strangeness, an undefinable quality, perhaps imagined, perhaps real. Now picture Wakefield saying farewell to his wife. It is the fading light of an October evening, the streets cloaked in autumn shadows. He is neatly dressed for travel, a drab overcoat, an oilcloth-covered hat, stiff boots, an umbrella in one hand, and a small portmanteau in the other. He informs Mrs. Wakefield that he is taking the night coach to the country. She wants to ask the length of his journey, its purpose, the exact day of his return, but instead she allows a quiet curiosity to linger in her eyes, indulging the harmless air of mystery he always seemed to enjoy. Wakefield reassures her, "Do not worry if he is delayed by 3 or 4 days, but expect him at supper on Friday evening." And yet Wakefield himself does not yet grasp what lies ahead. He extends his hand, she takes it, and their parting kiss is exchanged with the calm familiarity of 10 years of marriage. Then, stepping into the dim street, the middle-aged Mr. Wakefield moves away, almost resolved to puzzle his devoted wife with what will become a disappearance far longer than a week. Once the door closed behind him, Mrs. Wakefield glimpsed something fleeting, a parting smile from her husband, seen for an instant through the narrow crack of the door, and then gone. At the time, she hardly gave it a second thought, but as years passed, when she had been a widow longer than she had been a wife, that small smile returned in memory, flickering across every recollection of his face. In the quiet of her musings, she surrounded that moment with a cascade of imagined scenarios. Perhaps he lay in a coffin, his lips forever frozen in that same knowing curve. Or maybe he had ascended to heaven, yet even there his spirit carried that subtle, cunning grin. The memory was so persistent that even when all others had given him up for dead, she sometimes wondered if she was truly a widow. But our attention must return to the man himself. Let us follow Wakefield through the labyrinthine streets of London before he dissolves entirely into the endless river of its citizens. Searching for him among the throngs would be hopeless. The city swallows all individuality. Step for step, we trace him through twisting alleys and looping corners until he reaches a small, unremarkable apartment just a street away from his own home. Here he settles by the fireside, savoring the triumph of arriving unseen. His heart flutters at the narrow escapes, the crowded lantern-lit streets where he almost caught a passerby's glance, the footsteps that seemed to echo his own, the distant voice that might have called his name. Surely a dozen busybodies have been watching him, reporting his movements to his unsuspecting wife. Poor Wakefield! Little does he know how small and unnoticed he is in the vast tide of the city. Except for these lines, no eye has followed him. No one knows his quiet triumph. Only we, silent witnesses, share in the secret of his audacious disappearance. Go back to bed, you foolish man. Sleep. And when morning comes, if wisdom still has any hold on you, return home to Mrs. Wakefield and tell her everything. Do not remove yourself, not even for a single week, from the place you occupy in her life. The moment she believes you lost, or dead, or gone forever, something within her will shift, quietly, irrevocably. Human affection is fragile in a peculiar way, not because it stays broken for long, but because it seals itself shut so quickly, leaving no path back. Nearly regretting his little escapade, if it could even be called that, Wakefield goes to bed early, but sleep does not welcome him. He jolts awake from his first shallow rest, instinctively stretching his arms outward, only to grasp empty air. The bed feels vast, unfamiliar, cold. No, he thinks, pulling the covers tightly around himself. I will not sleep alone another night. Yet morning arrives, and with it hesitation. He rises earlier than usual and begins to examine his intentions, if they can be called intentions at all. His thoughts drift without direction, circling an idea he cannot fully name. He has taken this extraordinary step with a vague sense of purpose, but without the clarity to understand it himself. The plan is shapeless, impulsive, born of a weak resolve rather than deliberate design. Still, as he turns the matter over in his mind, one curiosity rises above the rest. He wants to know what is happening at home. How will his impeccably faithful wife endure a week of absence? How will the small, orderly world that once revolved around him adjust to the sudden void he has left behind? He imagines the quiet disruption, the subtle concern, the whispered assumptions. At the core of it all lies a dark, unhealthy vanity, the desire to observe his own absence, to measure his importance by the disturbance it causes. But how is he to satisfy this curiosity? Certainly not by remaining hidden in this tidy lodging. Though he slept just a street away from his own home, he might as well have been carried miles into the countryside by the night coach. Distance, he is beginning to realize, is not measured in streets, but in separation. And Wakefield, whether he admits it or not, has already gone farther than he ever intended.
Yet the danger lingered. If he returned too soon, the entire plan would collapse. Wakefield's mind, already tangled in doubt and hesitation, finally drove him to venture outside. Partly on impulse, partly led by habit, his ever-steady companion, he wandered toward the head of the street, intending only a brief, furtive glance at the house he had just abandoned. But habit, cunning and relentless, guided him further than he realized. Without conscious thought, he found himself standing at his own doorstep. And in that heartbeat of hesitation, the scrape of his boot against the step seemed to whisper, "Wakefield, where are you going?" At that instant, fate itself seemed to pivot. Breathless, heart racing in an unfamiliar surge of agitation, he bolted forward, scarcely daring to glance back around the distant corner. Could it be that no one had seen him? Would not the household, the dignified Mrs. Wakefield, the sharp-eyed maid, even the dirty-footed footboy, raise an alarm that would echo through the streets of London, hunting for their vanished master? It was a miraculous escape. Encouraged, he risked a pause and dared a look homeward. And yet, the familiar house felt different, subtly changed, as though the single night had twisted the world. It was the same house he had left, yet not the same, the uncanny distortion of memory brushing against the reality before him. In ordinary life, such moments strike us after months or years apart, when a hill, a lake, or some treasured artwork seems both familiar and alien. For Wakefield, that night had wrought a deeper, invisible transformation, a moral shift that he could not yet comprehend. Before turning away, he caught a fleeting glimpse of his wife crossing the front window. Her gaze was directed toward the head of the street, oblivious to the secret observer, yet somehow anchoring him to the life he had left behind. The cunning, anxious fool fled, his heart pounding with the thought that among 1,000 wandering eyes in the city, hers might have caught a glimpse of him. Relief washed over him, though his mind swirled in dizzy confusion when at last he sank into the warm glow of his lodging's coal fire. And so began this extraordinary caprice. From the first spark of an idea, a man of sluggish temperament had been stirred into action, and what followed unfolded with a peculiar inevitability. After much internal deliberation, Wakefield transformed himself. A new wig of reddish hair, garments plucked from a ragged old clothes shop, each item chosen to defy his usual brown-coated, unremarkable appearance. And just like that, Wakefield became another man. Once the disguise was in place, returning to his ordinary self would have been almost as impossible as taking the daring step that had put him here. His obstinacy, sharpened by the sulkiness of his temperament, reinforced his resolve. He would not return, at least not until Mrs. Wakefield had felt the shadow of fear creep across her heart. And so day by day he watched. Twice, thrice she appeared at the window, her step heavier, her cheeks paler, her brow clouded with worry. By the third week, he saw the first omen of real trouble, an apothecary entering the house. The next day, the knocker was muffled. By nightfall, a physician arrived in his carriage, solemn and imposing. Wakefield could only watch from the shadows as the doctor crossed his threshold, leaving him to imagine the worst. Could it be that his beloved wife was in danger? Might she be dying? The tension, the fear, the thrill of watching without being seen, all of it fed the strange exhilaration that had drawn him into this life of shadows. And so, Wakefield's extraordinary experiment continued, each day a delicate balance between curiosity, vanity, and an almost morbid fascination with the consequences of his absence.
By now, Wakefield's emotions had been stirred to something resembling energy, a flutter of life he had never known. But still he lingered away from his wife's side. Conscience whispered, urging him not to disturb her, yet he could not say what else restrained him. Weeks passed. Slowly she recovered. The crisis subsided, her heart heavy, yes, but calm. And whether Wakefield returned tomorrow or years from now, it would never beat for him with that fevered intensity again. These thoughts flickered through his mind, leaving him faintly aware of the chasm that now separated him from his former home. "It is only the next street," he murmured to himself. Fool! It might as well have been another world. Day after day he postponed his return, slipping from one imagined date to the next, never quite choosing the moment. Not tomorrow, perhaps next week, soon maybe. Poor man, even the dead have less chance of revisiting their old lives than Wakefield, the self-banished, wandering soul. Ah, to have a folio instead of a dozen pages, then might one trace how invisible forces shape every action, weaving consequences into a tapestry of iron necessity. Wakefield was caught in such a spell. For 10 long years he haunted the streets near his house, invisible, faithful in heart to the wife he could not approach, silently observing her life as he faded from it. Long ago he had ceased to notice the peculiarity of his own conduct. What once would have seemed extraordinary, the audacity, the strange courage, had become ordinary to him. And yet, beneath the mundane rhythm of his days, the extraordinary had been quietly unfolding, shaping both his life and hers in ways neither could fully comprehend. Amid the bustling streets of London, a man moves quietly through the crowd. Elderly now, unremarkable to careless eyes, yet in his every gesture and bearing is written the story of an extraordinary fate, visible only to those who know how to read it. He is thin, his narrow forehead lined with deep furrows. His small, dull eyes flit nervously to the world around him, yet more often seem to peer inward, lost in reflection. He tilts his head slightly,
walking with a subtle, crooked gait as though unwilling to fully reveal himself to the world. Watch him closely, and you will sense that chance and circumstance have sculpted something rare from the ordinary clay of life. On the opposite side of the street, a stout woman moves in the slow, deliberate pace of settled widowhood. Her hands clutch a prayer book. Her face bears the calm patience of years spent in quiet reflection. Regrets, if they linger, have become part of her very being, inseparable from her present self. Then, as the man and woman draw near, the press of the crowd nudges them together. Their hands brush. Her chest presses lightly against his shoulder. They freeze, eyes locking, a decade of separation folding into a single suspended moment. After 10 long years, Wakefield meets his wife again. The crowd swirls and separates them. She continues toward the church, but pauses at the entrance, glancing back along the street, a look of confusion and recognition crossing her features. Then, with measured grace, she steps inside, opening her prayer book, leaving him in the street. A man's secret life has finally brushed against the world he left behind.
And the man, his face wild with the weight of years and secrets, hurried home through the crowded streets of London. The bustling, indifferent city seemed to part for him, yet none truly saw him. He reached his lodgings, slammed the door, and collapsed onto his bed. Years of suppressed feeling surged at once. His feeble mind, long dulled by habit and inaction, caught fire for a moment with raw intensity. The strange, miserable tapestry of his life, the secrecy, the absence, the relentless isolation, was laid bare before him in an instant. He threw up his hands and cried aloud, "Wakefield! Wakefield! You are mad!" Perhaps he was. The circumstances of his life had warped him in ways no ordinary human could comprehend. He had somehow removed himself from the world, neither alive in the lives of others, nor dead enough to escape entirely. Unlike a hermit, he remained in the throng, brushing past the crowds, always near his home, always beside his wife in shadow, yet never feeling her warmth, never receiving her affection. Wakefield's fate was unprecedented. To retain the ties of human sympathy, to be entangled in human affairs, yet lose all influence over them. The effects on his heart and mind would be fascinating to trace, the subtle corrosion of intimacy, the quiet distortion of reality, but he, for all his years of absence, remained largely unaware. He still thought himself the same man as ever. Fleeting glimpses of truth flashed in his mind, yet disappeared as quickly as they came. And still he repeated to himself, "I shall go back soon," never realizing he had been saying these very words for 20 long years. And so, in retrospect, those 20 years would seem scarcely longer than the single week Wakefield had once imagined for his absence. To him, it would be no more than a brief interlude in the story of his life. When the time came, he thought, to step once more into his parlor, his wife would surely clap her hands at joy at the sight of the middle-aged Mr. Wakefield. Alas, how little men know! Time, relentless and indifferent, waits for no folly, and the years have passed like fleeting shadows. It was on one gusty autumn evening, in the 20th year since his disappearance, that Wakefield set out for the house he still dared to call his own. Rain fell in hurried sheets, striking the pavement and vanishing before a man could raise his umbrella. Pausing near the house, he glimpsed the red glow of the fire through the parlor windows on the second floor. The flickering light cast grotesque shadows on the ceiling. Mrs. Wakefield's cap, nose, chin, and broad waist merging into a caricature that danced and leapt with the flames, almost too lively for the figure of an elderly widow. A sudden gust drove the rain full upon him, chilling him to the bone. Should he remain there, wet and shivering, when warmth awaited him inside? when the fire roared on his own hearth, and his wife surely would run to fetch the gray coat and small garments she had kept tucked in the closet of their bedchamber. No, Wakefield was no fool. He climbed the steps, heavy with years that had stiffened his legs, though he felt none of it, and prepared at last to cross the threshold of a life he had abandoned 2 decades before. Stay, Wakefield. Would you really step into the only home that remains yours? Then step carefully, for you might as well walk into your grave. The door swings open. As he crosses the threshold, we catch one last glimpse of his face, that crafty, knowing smile, the same playful mischief that had been teasing his wife for all these years. How unrelentingly he has toyed with her patience, this quiet trickster of a husband. And yet, a good night's rest finally to Wakefield. This moment of reunion, if it can indeed be called such, could only have come by pure accident, unplanned, unheralded. We shall not follow him inside. The rest is theirs alone. But there is much to reflect upon, much to ponder. Amid the seeming chaos of our mysterious world, every individual is fitted into a delicate pattern, and every pattern into another, forming a system far greater than the sum of its parts. Step aside for a moment, as Wakefield did, and the risk of losing your place forever is real. He became, in a sense, the outcast of the universe, walking in the midst of life, yet removed from its reciprocity. A man who vanished and returned, changed and unchanged all at once. And so ends the curious tale of Wakefield, a story of absence and observation, of subtle mischief and human folly, and the quiet resilience of love that survives even the strangest tests of time.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.